The Korean War.
Korean War. Okay. And what was your branch of service?
The United States Marine Corps.
And your highest rank?
The sergeant.
Okay. In what general locations did you serve?
All of South Korea and North Korea, part of North Korea.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted. Well, I enlisted the first time in 1948. I went in for 1 year active duty and 6 years of reserve. Because I was going to school at night, I didn't have to go to reserve every week. I'd go 2 weeks during the summer. I got out in 1949 after serving a year, and the following summer I was supposed to go, in the summer of 1950, I was supposed to go down to Little Creek, Virginia for more amphibious training. I served when I was in the first time, in 48, I served at Parris Island, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and Quantico, Virginia, training officers in Quantico. And I was relieved of active duty, or released from active duty, in September of 1949, and went back to work and was going to night school and preparing to go into Brooklyn College in the fall of 1950. But I got called back up in July of 1950, about a month after the Korean War started. And I was inducted back into the service in September of 1950.
Do you remember where you were living at the time?
Living in New York City, Richmond Hill, which is part of Queens. It's an area over by JFK Airport now.
Do you recall the date?
It was sometime in September of 1950 that I got a telegram in July of 1950 to report to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in August. But my brother was getting married and I was best man, so I was granted a month's to take care of that. And then they changed it to September.
Okay.
And then I got, from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, I went down to Camp Lejeune in the 2nd Marine Division.
And why did you join?
To serve just 1 year.
Serve just 1 year.
To beat the draft, I should say. If you went in for 1 year, you went in and went into the reserves, like I said before. But if you didn't go in, like a lot of my friends, they got drafted for 2 years because the draft was mandatory at that time. Probably, I'd say 90% of the guys my age were drafted by the time they were 21.
Huh. And you said you joined the Marines. Is there any reason why you joined that branch rather than another?
I just liked that service. I admired what they were doing. Probably one of the reasons is that 2 or 3 of my friends joined and said it was excellent training, which it was. And I was glad I did.
All right. Well, going into training, can you remember your first days in the service?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
You mind telling us about it?
Parris Island in September of 1948. It's just over the border from Georgia, just north of Savannah, Georgia, and it's filled with mosquitoes and all kinds of reptiles and things like that. And it's an island jutting out into the Atlantic Ocean, and it was built in, I think it was 1914, as a training base for the Marine Corps. And that was 44 years later I went there. It was very rigid training. Didn't have a Coca-Cola for 3 months. Didn't have a beer for 3 months. in New York City, you could drink at 18 at that time, so, you know, I was known to have a beer or two. And they get you up in the morning at 5 o'clock and run you all day long, and you get to bed at 9 o'clock at night, and then back up. You know, you were very tired.
Yeah.
But excellent training, and it was a good thing that I got that type of training because I used it. Between that and the Boy Scouts, it helped me out tremendously to prepare me for the time that I spent in Korea.
Can you tell me about your boot camp and the training experiences that you had?
Well, the training down in boot camp was, again, like I said, from 5 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, and 7 days a week. They gave me a couple of hours off to go to church on Sunday morning, but that's about it. And the rest of the time, for 3 months, it was 13 weeks, but they didn't count the 1 week. It was, and then we stayed in Paris Island the whole time, never leaving Paris Island at all. He used to say the only way to go off this island is to swim out into the ocean, and the Geechees will get you. That was the Geechees were the people that were a mixture between the African Americans and the French that came down the coast of North Carolina. That if you've ever been down in North Carolina, you'll see the cooking is very Canadian, even in the African American communities. And the Geechees were over in the island of off the coast of South Carolina. It's Hilton Head now. It's a very exclusive place, but at that time there was nothing over at Hilton Head. And we trained every day, marching, going on hikes, going down to the beach, training in landing crafts, training in all types of things. And then you spent 2 weeks out at the what they call the range, which is the firing range, which is in the Marine Corps, everybody's a rifleman. There's no such thing as whatever they have in the other forms, a quartermaster or anything like that. Everybody serves as a rifleman for the first 13 weeks and trains as a rifleman. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps makes sure of that. We went on a lot of marches. There's a thing that they call, we used to call it the 40-mile march. And that was your pre-graduation. You went for 2 days, you marched 20 miles a day for 2 days, and that was, kind of difficult. You got a lot of blisters on your feet, and they had a place in there that was very swampy, and you had to go through the swamps and things like that. So it was, again, very intense training, but very good training. 2 weeks you spent out in the rifle range, learning how to fire all kinds of weapons, machine guns, submachine guns, BARs, Browning automatic rifles, how to throw hand grenades, how to use all kinds of weapons. Not only to use them, but to take them apart, to clean them, to make sure that they operate. One of the things is that you had to take your rifle apart and put it together again, what they call detailed maintenance, and you had to do it blindfolded because you had to do it at night if the time came up. So what you would do is you would take the things apart and lay them in the order that you took them apart. so that the last thing you took out was the furthest place over on your right-hand side. So if it's dark and you can't see, you immediately went to the firing pin, which was the last thing you took out, and then put it into the bolt, and then put the bolt in with the spring, and then the spring into that, and then back into the chamber. So you had to be able to do that. A lot of guys dropped out. There was probably about, it started off with, I think there was about 70 in our platoon. And we ended up with about 61, 62, 63. What happens is if you fail something, you have to go back a platoon. In other words, if you failed detailing, stripping a rifle or a machine gun, or didn't qualify on the range, that's meaning qualification is that you have to hit a target and you have to get so many points. The points are, if you hit the bullseye, you get maybe 5 points. If you hit outside the bullseye, you only get 3. If you hit just the target, you only get 1. So if you didn't qualify, then you had to drop back to another platoon and then take that whole series over again. And if you didn't qualify on that 40-mile march, you didn't graduate. And then you went back, and if you failed it again, you went back again until you passed it.
Sounds stressful.
So there was probably about 8, 9 guys that just dropped out completely. They couldn't take it. And what happens is they send them home. What we used to call dress blues and tennis shoes. They would give them a blue jacket, a shirt, a pair of gray pants, and tennis shoes that you had. Tennis shoes meaning sneakers. And they would go home with discharge for the convenience of the government. But like I said, out of the 70, 60 we'd pass, which was bad, not bad. Got out of there in November of 1948, and went home for 10 days, and then for 10-day leave, and then I went back after that to a place called Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina. And that's where you get what they call the advanced infantry training. That's where you really become proficient. That's especially the one-year guys like I was. They used to kind of cater to us because they had to jam all of this training in a certain period of time to get you up to snuff. So I served down there for 3 months in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and we went over to on maneuvers over to a little island off of Puerto Rico called Vieques, and it was a beautiful island, beaches like you wouldn't see, any place in the world. They used to bomb the hell out of the island. And then we would be in landing crafts coming off of a boat, like we were, simulating a battle. And we would land, and then they have guys, up on the hills shooting at you, not live ammunition, blanks. But the bombs and so on that the planes dropped were real bombs. There was very little people on the island at that time. Today, that island is a destination. They stopped bombing the hell out of the island in, I believe it was sometime around the 70s. And now people live over there. They have luxury homes, something like a Hilton Head, like I told you down in South Carolina. Hilton Head is a beautiful area now. But anyway, and then we would get back on the ship after spending 10 days securing the island, and they would have the maneuvers where you had to secure areas of the island, and just like they did in war. And then they brought me back to Camp Lejeune, and we graduated from advanced infantry training. And then they sent me up to Quantico, Virginia after that to be stationed up there. And I stayed in Quantico until I think it was September the 3rd of 1949. And I was released again from, like I said, from active duty. And then went home and went back to school. I was working at a brewery at the time in the advertising department, and Rheingold Breweries was the name of it, down in New York. And then I was going to night school, like I said, and working during the day. And went to school for 4 nights a week, and then had Friday nights off, and it was a pretty good deal. So I did that until I took the test for the police department in, I believe it was in March of 1950. I believe it was to join the police department, and when I became 21 in New York City. Being an Irishman, every Irish mother wanted their sons to either be a fireman in New York City, or a policeman in New York City, or work for the city. It was a real steady job.
So you said a lot of people didn't make it through the training. How did you make it through?
I made it through pretty good. I was in good shape. You know, I wasn't very heavy. I was, maybe at that time, I was about 140, 150 pounds. The guys that didn't make it were the guys that were out of shape, heavy. And like I told you, I was in the Boy Scouts for 5 years, so, you know, camping and things like that, being in a tent, you learn from it. And most of the guys that didn't make it, it was psychological problems, probably. Most likely, they gave up. You know, like I said, the drill instructors were not very nice to you. They, what they would do is they would test you. You've probably seen in some of the movies and so on that they have. They would test your ability to control yourself, and they would get right up on top of you and yell and scream at you. And I heard about this from the friends that I had in school and so on that had gone in before me, and relatives, and I said, you know, you got to take the training. It's better for you. In the 3 months, you learned an awful lot. You learned a lot about yourself, and you use it for the rest of your life, really.
Do you recall any of your instructors, like their names?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Staff Sergeant Rogers, he was the senior drill instructor. I can't remember his first name. We never called anybody by their first name. And then there was another one called Corporal Granger. And another one called Corporal Thruffall. T-H-R-U-F-E-L-L, I believe it was. And 4 years later, in East Hartford, Connecticut, I stopped for a stop sign, and I look over, and he's the policeman standing there. I parked the car and I walked over to him and I said, Corporal Thruffall, do you remember me? He looked at me, he said, no. And I told him, I introduced him. I was in Platoon 204 in Paris Island in 1948. And he says, okay. He says, you look familiar. Because when you get down there, the first thing you do is you get off the bus. They send you down by a train to a place called Yamasee. And you get off the trains in Yamasee and they take you by truck over to Paris Island. And you sleep. You go to bed about 9, 10 o'clock. They give you a cot and so on. You get up the next morning and you take all of your clothes, every stitch of clothes that you have on you, and you put them into a box, and you put your address at home, and they send that box to your house back in Richmond Hill. And then they give you delousing. They spray you with all things. They give you all kinds of shots for all kinds of diseases that they want to make sure that you don't have, or you prevent you from having. And then they give you a haircut, and they completely shave your head. I mean, nothing. You go like this, it's like touching your beard. And your hair grows back in the 13 weeks decently. It doesn't come back very long, but it comes back decent. And then they give you clothes to wear, what we call dungarees, which is the fatigues or whatever they call that, and a pair of sneakers. That's why I say tennis shoes. And you wear those tennis shoes for 2 weeks, and your feet blister like crazy from it. Because the training is so severe, and they kind of snap you out of your civilian stuff, and they want you to just think entirely of the United States Marine Corps as a training. And then they don't give you a uniform until the second week, and that's when most of the guys fell out. If you have a psychological problem or a weight problem, or you couldn't run the obstacle course, or they would run you for miles at a time, and guys would just fall out from exhaustion. And I used to say, there's a guy in front of me, as soon as he falls out, I'm gonna fall out. And the guy in front of me was taking a look at the guy in front of him, and then the guy in front of him, and the guy in front of him. So what you were doing, you were keeping up with the pack.
So after you got done training and you graduated, where did you go?
Went to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and I served with the 2nd Marine Division, the 6th Marine, 2nd Marine Division. 6th Marines is the regiment. I can't remember what battalion I was with or company I was with. I think it was Easy Company or E Company, which would be the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines, 5th Marine, 1st Marine Division. And I served there for the 3 months, and the culmination of the graduation was before you went to the island of Vieques, and you made a landing there, and you graduated. You became an advanced infantry trainee. You became a specialist. And I became a PFC, which is a private first class. You go in as a private. At the time I went in as a private, and I made $60 a month. The first month I was there, or the second month, they raised it to $65 a month. The government gave you a raise. It was a complete raise from, they gave everybody that was in that rank a raise. And I was a private. So I got $65 a month. And then I became a PFC, and I got $70 a month. So that was a pretty good deal. I mean, you could buy a lot of beers for at 15 cents a beer.
Wow.
So it was quite good. When I became a corporal, was over in Korea. I became a corporal in May of 1951. And I got $92 a month, which was a big raise. And then when I became a sergeant, when I came back, I made $112 a month. I think it was $112 or $114 a month. And I stayed at that rank until I was released the second time from active duty. But on the way over to Vieques, or on the way back from Vieques, on the way over we stopped at Puerto Rico in San Juan and get off the boats there, and they let us go in and have a couple of beers and chase a few girls around for a couple of nights or whatever it was, and then over to Vieques and the landing crafts, and then after that they gave us a special treat to go over to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. you've heard of Guantanamo Bay, of course.
Yeah.
Beautiful area. It's if you would have seen it, it's like a country club. Uh, uh, we got into a lot of problems over there, and how would I say it? We got thrown off the base. They told us after the second night to get rid of those guys. A beer was 20 cents over in Guantanamo Bay, but rum and coke was 15 cents. Didn't take anything to notice. You get a lot more buzz on you from a rum and coke than you got from a beer. They had a beer called Hatui beer down there, and it's a picture of a one-eyed Indian, a profile like this of a one-eyed Indian. And they said you knew you had enough when the Indian had two eyes. So it was a very powerful beer, but we drank a lot of rum and coke. And the reason that we kind of got thrown off was a guy drove a Jeep into the swimming pool down there at the officers club. And they didn't like that very much. So we got back on the ships and went over to Vegas and Puerto Rico, I should say. But it was, again, a very good training, excellent training. The Marine Corps is a special company. I mean, they know how to train people. Let me say this, that right now they're having difficulties in the Marine Corps with training women. There's some women that would be able to take that training, but there's majority of the women that will not be able to take that training. The Marine Corps is the last people to have women serve in combat. There's some women that would be very good in combat, I'm sure, but the majority of them, like some men who were very good in combat, and some weren't very good in combat. They had an awful lot of people when that shot fired, they break up or they don't do things that they're supposed to do, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. You know that. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So the Marine Corps, when they are doing that, even today, and I get together with the guys I was in Korea with every year. We have a reunion. There's probably about maybe 15 of us left out of 620, I think it was. And we lost 126 over there, 123 or 126. And even today, we take a look at it and we're a bunch of old men, 85, 86. Most of the guys that I served with were World War II veterans because they got called back in. They were in the reserves. I mean, I hate to say it, but I had this one guy that was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard with me, and I'm waiting online to have the doctors check you out. And he said, I hear, he says that if you have a wife and 3 kids, they don't want you in it. He says, I've got a wife and 2 kids and one on the way. And he said, one is being born in October. So I said, you going to be home? He says, yeah, I'm a milkman. He said, I told my boss I'd be back tomorrow. Well, I met him about a month later down in Camp Lejeune, and I said to him, Jesus, his name and my name were close. In the Marine Corps or any service, if your name begins with B, you were a bunch of guys with Brooks Brothers or something like that, and Belcher, and then you wait online, you go in by alphabetical order. Well, his name was close to being Stack or an S or something. And I said, gee, how come? I said, I thought you were going home to get the milk run. And he said, well, they don't count the one in the oven. He said they don't count it until the baby is born. They had to go down to Camp Lejeune, have the baby, and pay for her, to have the baby. And then after the baby was born, he was discharged and sent back home. I mean, real stupid.
Wow.
And there was guys that had psychological problems that they call them shell shock, I guess it was, during the Second World War, but they were in the reserve. They took them too. I had one guy that had a brace on his leg from a wound that he received in Okinawa, I think it was, and they took him in too. So it was kind of dumb on the government's part to do that.
And after you said you went to Puerto Rico and
Yeah.
Cuba, is that when you went to Korea?
No. That was in the first time. That was in 1949, 48 and 49. I went to Cuba, Puerto Rico, Vieques, and then Bermuda. They gave us on the way back from Vieques, they gave us a 3-day pass to go into Bermuda, Hamilton, Bermuda. And we got into a little problem over in Hamilton, Bermuda too. And they didn't exactly ask us to leave, but we left anyway, a day sooner. But the outfit that I was with was probably 80% of 1-year guys. And we were a breed apart. We were all 18, 19 years old and training together. Probably, maybe not 80%, maybe 65, 70%. But after Cuba and Guantanamo and Vegas and Puerto Rico and Bermuda, we went back to Camp Lejeune, did the graduation from advanced infantry training, and then we got dispersed all over the country. Some guys were sent to China, some guys were sent to the Pacific. We were still fighting in China. Well, we weren't fighting in China, but we had an ammunition depot up in Tinsing, which was north of Shanghai, and the guys that I served with went over there to guard the trains. And there was an awful lot of ammunition that we gave to Chiang Kai-shek, who was Chiang Kai-shek was fighting against the communists, the Mao Zedong, and that group. And there was an ammunition depot up in Tientsin, which was north of Shanghai, that the nationalist forces, the Chiang Kai-shek forces, and they would guard the trains and try to load all of this ammunition and all of these weapons, the submachine guns that we found over in Korea 2 years later, and that the communists captured. And what they would do was to guard the trains coming down, and then they would ship all of this ammunition, and there was an ammunition depot, and like I said, in Tientsin. And I met them afterwards, and they told me what their duty was to, and I was serving over in Quantico because I was only serving a year, so they weren't about to ship me over to China because they'd have to ship me back in another couple of months. So they were taking the guys that were in for 2 years or 3 years at that time. So those guys went over. Some went to embassy duties around the world. And, you know, embassies are guarded by the United States Marines. And then a really good friend of mine that was close to me from the time that I went in, right through Korea and even to this day, he was on guard duty in Annapolis, which was not too far from Quantico, and I used to go up to see him quite often, and we'd go on Liberty into Baltimore. But Annapolis was a good duty station for the guys, and again, he was a 1-year man, and they weren't about to ship him overseas or any place. So we got shipped all over the country, and I got shipped to Quantico, Virginia, to help train, and I was in what we call a line company there. It was a Charlie company of the 22nd Marines. So I served there for about 5 months, I guess it was.
5 months. Okay. And what were your first impressions of Korea when you got there?
primitive country. After I got called back in, I mentioned I went to Camp Lejeune again, back to Camp Lejeune where I trained in the infantry, and they kept us into shape. From September and October, we trained really hard, and then in November, when I went home for Thanksgiving, I got my orders to get shipped out to Korea. And that's when the Chinese entered the war in the end of September. I don't know if you ever heard of the Chosin Reservoir, but that's the Chinese came down across the Yalu River in Mongolia and Manchuria and came down and helped the Koreans. MacArthur had beaten the Koreans by the Marines landing in right outside of a place called Incheon, right outside of Seoul, and we were getting the hell kicked out of us in Korea, and the Marines went over there in July of 1950, and then they made the landing behind enemy lines and in Incheon, and they were able to catch the North Korean army in the rear, and then they were pushed up from what they call the Pusan Karimata. But anyway, I didn't get shipped out until December of 1950 to go over to Korea. I ended up getting over there in January, and that was when the 1st Marine Division that lost a third of their people from frostbite and wounds up in the reservoir, where the temperature was anywhere between 20 to 30 below zero at night. And you got a tremendous amount of frostbite. Guys that I knew lost fingers, lost legs, lost hands, lost noses, ears. You can't fight cold. You can fight heat. I'd rather fight in the heat than fight in the cold. And your weapons would freeze up. Your rifles would freeze up. Machine guns would freeze up. Your water would freeze up. Your feet would freeze up. I never got frostbite. I was pretty sharp to not get that. I heard so much about it and studied it, and they gave us training for it. So, but I got over there on January the 15th, I think it was, of 1951, and I went to Japan first. Went into Japan. I went from San Francisco. I went from Camp Lejeune by train, troop train, all the way across the United States to San Francisco. They took us off the trains then and put some of us on boats and some of us on planes and flew the guys over to Korea and flew to Hawaii, from Hawaii to Johnston Island, from Johnston Island to Guam, from Guam to Yokosuka, Japan, and then from there over to Korea. When I got off the plane in Korea, I was at a place called Pohang-dong, which is on the east coast of Korea, just above Busan. And here I was 20 years old, kid out of New York, and one of the things that I knew that I was in a country that wasn't too well in the 20th century at that time, was there was a woman coming down carrying what they call an A-frame. An A-frame is a pack that they have on their back. They can carry all the things with their house and everything. It's a very, very good thing to have. She's carrying that, and she squatted down to relieve herself in the middle of a road. And I'm looking over there, and I said, I guess I'm not in a very good country here. And the temperature at that time was probably in 10 or 15 degree below zero range. You were right on the ocean. The ocean was, we would garden an airfield down there, Pohang Dong Airfield. And for the first 10 days that I was there, we guarded the airfield. And then taking a look at it, the smell of the, it was very foreign to you. You don't know what smells smell like. Rice paddies in Korea or any other, Vietnam or China or anything else, is fertilized by human waste. Not not agriculturally best. And you get the smells off of that. And my first impression was, again, at 20 years old, was, what the hell am I doing here? And I got used to it after a month. And they all smelled alike. The smells were part of your life.
So you said you found out you were going around Thanksgiving time. What was your reaction to that?
My reaction was maybe an adventure. At 20 years old, the only thing that bothered me was when I went home for Thanksgiving, I didn't tell my parents because, as I told you, I lost a brother in the Second World War, and they probably didn't think well of another son getting in harm's way. I didn't tell them until first time I told my mother was in a phone booth out in San Francisco that I said I was going over to Japan. She didn't know that I had left the States. And I said, don't worry, I'm going to be over in Japan. I won't be over there with the fighting. So she believed me.
Oh, and you went anyways. Wow. So you said you also went to Japan. So what was your first reaction to Japan? Your first impression?
It was devastated. When I say devastated, I mean it was bombed. And as you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the I didn't go there, but I seen all of the places that were the bombed. They were living in wooden shacks. It was not a good situation.
How long were you there?
I was only there a couple of days.
You stayed on a base?
Yeah, I was on a base called Itami. It was an airport. They shipped us to the airport to fly us over to Korea. Some guys went over by boat, and I was lucky I flew over. I didn't have to get seasick.
So when you were in Korea, what was your assignment? You said you were guarding an airfield?
The first 10 days I was there, when I got off the plane, they break it up into groups. And again, like I said, the Marine Corps in this fashion, it's Stewart, Sundergaard, Stack, all the S's together. Well, you go to Baker Company, or B Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. Maybe the Aaron and Adams and all the guys with A's, they go to the 7th Marines, or they go to the 1st Marines, or whatever it is. So we all got lined up at the airport, and they said, okay, this group here, call out your names, you go here, and then you go there. And I went to an outfit called Baker Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. And they were known as the Baker Bandits. They had a reputation of stealing everything in sight. So that's why they were named the Bandits. They used to tell them to get the bandits out of there. They were stealing too much. And I served with them for the next 6 months until June of 1951. And what we did was we guarded the airfield for the first 10 days. And then the Chinese were making their big move down south. Chinese came down with 300 to 400,000 troops. The United States and South Korea at that time had maybe about 150,000 troops there. So you had 2 to 1. And they were thinking, MacArthur was thinking of abandoning Korea and bringing boats over to get the guys off the beaches. And of course the Chinese came down, and this was in January and February of 1951. Chinese did a job on us. I mean, nobody expected them to come into the war, but they came in. And we fought the Chinese, and they were good fighting men. They weren't the one of the generals, that General Almond, who was on MacArthur's staff, called them a bunch of Chinese laundrymen, because at that time down in New York, every laundry had the Chinese that were doing it. And they weren't Chinese laundrymen, they were good fighters. They were well trained. They fought the Japanese for 10 years. They fought the nationalist Chinese, Chiang Kai-shek, for 5 years. They were no pushovers. They were tough guys. You know? And they didn't have the equipment, half of the equipment that we had. They didn't have shoe packs, which are hunting boots. You ever see hunting boots? When it got to be 30 degrees below zero, these guys had sneakers on. And you talk about frostbite. And I used to see these guys with feet that big for frostbite. And the Chinese came down in February, and MacArthur was thinking of abandoning Korea because of the Chinese coming in. And 1st Marine Division was going to be the last ones out of there. We had to fight the rear guard action. And in December of 1950, a guy by the name of General Walker, who was on Patton's, he was, you heard of General Patton in the Second World War. He was, Walker was one of the top generals in Patton's army. And he got killed in a Jeep accident in December, late December of 1950. And they brought in a guy by the name of Ridgway, Matthew Ridgway, to take his place. Matthew Ridgway was a tough guy. And he said, we ain't gonna retreat no more. We're gonna fight him. And we put up a fight in January and February. It was just north of Pusan, and the Chinese came down and they just tried to kick the hell out of us, and we fought back, and we defeated them. And then we started going against them, and from March until June, we drove all the way up into North Korea again, and drove the Chinese, which were, again, 300,000 Chinese. And then by that time, the North Korean army was really defeated. MacArthur had defeated them, and they weren't much, it was all Chinese. And Ridgway really turned the war around. And then MacArthur got fired. Did you ever hear about that?
He got fired because he wanted to retreat?
No. Truman was president at the time. And MacArthur didn't think much of Truman. He called him a haberdasher. The guy owned a tailor shop in Independence, Missouri. Truman was a tough man. He was a great president. And what I admired about him so much was when he left the presidency, when Eisenhower took over, and he was leaving the presidency, MacArthur was going, not MacArthur, Truman was going home back to Independence, Missouri, and the reporters followed him, and they stopped him at a gas station. Now, he didn't fly out of there like Bill Clinton did on Air Force One, or Bush did in helicopters, or guys did in those times, but he was driving back home to Independence, Missouri, and they stopped him, and he was getting gasoline at the station. This is after Eisenhower, just the same day that Eisenhower was inaugurated, and the reporter said to Truman, "Well, where are you going?" He says, "I'm going home." He said, "To Independence, Missouri." He said, "My job is done here."
So you did
That's
see
profound.
Yeah. So you said you did see combat?
Huh?
You saw combat when you were over in Korea?
Oh yeah, every day for 6 months, just about.
And were there a lot of casualties in your unit?
Probably about 40% casualties. If you got a Purple Heart, you got wounded. You went back to, if you were able to, you went back. And if you got 2 Purple Hearts, you went home. We lost, out of 600 and some odd guys who were over there for 3 years, we lost about 120 something. And we probably had, out of that 600, probably close to 300 were wounded at one time or another.
And can you describe like a typical day of your service while you were there?
Typical day was you get up in the morning at about whenever light came. What you do during the night is you would have a perimeter, and you'd circle the perimeter. The company would perimeter. The Chinese like to attack at night. Of course, the Chinese didn't have any air force. We used to kick the hell out of them in the daytime when we see them out there. The Air Force would napalm them, they'd bomb them. Napalm was a wonderful thing. It kept them away from us. Napalm is not a nice thing to have. I've seen guys hit by napalm, and you don't want that being burned to death or being burned in, with your hands or your arms or anything. Not a good thing, but I tell you, in the wintertime, you'd smell that napalm and you'd say to yourself, it's helping me out. Looking back at it, it's a cruel thing. But what were we going to do? The typical day was you woke up about 6 o'clock. You had rations, what they called. There wasn't any cooks or anything. You cooked your own food. It came in cans. And if you were able to have a fire, you'd heat it up. If you didn't have a fire, you'd heat it cold.
Do you remember what was in it?
Yeah, there was several. You had what we call a wet ration, and that wet ration consisted of either pork and beans, franks and beans, corned beef hash, hamburger patties, sausage patties, lima beans, and ham. A couple of other things. And then you have a dry ration, which consisted of a biscuit. It was coffee, the ground instant coffee, instant milk, candy, sugar, a pack of cigarettes, 10 cigarettes. If you smoked, you smoked them. If you didn't, you gave them to somebody. Then they had a smaller can, which was a dessert, which was maybe about 2 inches high and a circumference of, in a diameter of maybe 2 to 3 inches. And in there they had like pears, mixed fruit cocktail, they called it, applesauce, any kinds of desserts, I can't remember. Pineapples, I think, were one. Peaches was another one. Peaches was always my favorite. It was very limited food. It was maybe 3 or 4 ounces of meat and or macaroni. There was one called macaroni and meat and macaroni. And but you could eat it cold. The one that I couldn't eat cold was the sausage patties. You know, it was all grease and it was frozen. You had to kind of chop it to get it down. If you got really hungry, you ate it. But a lot of times guys would put it under their armpit and thaw it out in the wintertime. Or if we were near a tank, we would ask the guy in the tank to put it near the manifold and it would heat it up. You stick a hole in it so the thing wouldn't explode. It would heat it up. Or sometimes we'd have a fire. They would allow us a fire if we weren't too close to the line, you know. But usually you don't get a fire, you know, because it shows, you know, that especially at that time the smoke comes up and then the Chinese or the North Koreans knew where we were. And you didn't want to let them know where you were because they would lob in mortars or artillery into you.
So while you were there, you said you lost about 120 and
Yeah.
300 were wounded. Did you have any of your unit be captured, or did you capture any North Koreans or Chinese?
One time it happened. Let me tell you a little story. I was over there about 10 days, I told you, and then we went out on a combat mission. And we went up into the hills chasing what we call the guerrillas. Remember I told you that the Marine Division landed in Incheon and drove all of the guys out, and there was an awful lot of North Koreans that was still stuck down in South Korea. Their units were decimated, but they went up into the hills, and we call that the Great Guerrilla Hunt. Well, they sent us, the guerrillas or the guys in the back of the lines. Well, we went out on the guerrilla hunt in February of, the end of January, beginning of February of 1951. And we were going up into the hills. And we had this interpreter who was Japanese, a little guy, maybe 5 foot tall. Guy name is Pak, P-U-K. And he was an interpreter, and he was in the Japanese army, but he knew Korean, you know, and English fluently. So we captured a couple of guys, and I remember I was standing maybe from here to that wall or a little further away from him when he was interrogating the guy. He was talking in Chinese to him, or the Koreans, and if he didn't answer him correctly, the guy would hit him with the side of his foot, knock him off of the stone wall. He was sitting on a stone wall about this high. And I said, gee, that isn't very nice to do. I said, I'm sitting there, not saying anything, and then the Jap talked a little bit in Chinese or North Korean again to him, or Korean. Didn't hear it, and he took this ammunition thing and whacked him on the side of the head. Really, the guy started bleeding like crazy. And with this, I get over there and I said, geez, that's not a nice thing to do to a guy. You know, if he doesn't want to talk to you, he doesn't want to talk to you. You know, your Geneva Convention, you give him the name, rank, and serial number. And the sergeant told me, you shut up, Stack. He says, get back into where you are. And he's a sergeant. I'm a PFC. I went back to where I was. You know, 30 years later, I talked to that sergeant about it. And the next day, we lost 7 guys that we used to go out on patrols into villages. And you get into a village and you report to the police people. And then you commandeer a house for the night. And you stay in that house, and then you'd leave on another patrol and you'd meet up with the other group. And mostly 7 to 10 men patrols. Well, what happened, they captured one of the guys, Sergeant Yasenko's patrol. And there was 7 guys in that Yasenko's patrol. Yasenko was born in Russia. Came over to this country when he was 2 to 3 years old, I guess it was. And went in the Marine Corps in World War II. And got called back in again and for Korea. I don't know if he even came out, but he got captured anyway. And we got word that they hung him in the barn afterwards. So when it came time to interrogating prisoners after that, and they whacked him on the side of the head with anything, it didn't bother me one iota, because all I could think of is maybe we could have saved Yasenko if we would have known what somebody could have told you up in the hills. So, is it right? No, it isn't right. But Yasenko would maybe be back at the reunions every year if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
And the other 6 guys that were with him. So they were the only ones that I know that were captured. Nobody ever. We know we got into a situation where we got surrounded an awful lot of times, but we always fought our way out. And snuck out the back door or whatever.
Do you receive any medals?
Purple Heart, and then the combat medals, and then I was severely wounded in June of 1951, and they took me from there by helicopter down to the aid station. We got hit about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was squad leader, the machine gun squad. And an explosion happened in the middle of the night, and I was sleeping in the back of the gun position, myself and another guy. We used to have what was known as a 50% watch. 50% meaning you're right on the line, so you knew that they were going to attack you during the night. So you had to have half of the people awake. So there was 3 guys down in the gun position, and there was 3 guys sleeping. And about 2 o'clock, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there's the explosion of grenades. They started to come up, and they're throwing these grenades up into. Usually we set out booby traps to come across. You'd tie it to a pin on a hand grenade, and you stretch it across into a tree. And if they tripped that, you knew that they were down there, and the grenade would go off. Well, that night we got there, and it was dark, so I couldn't put out any booby traps out there. So we dug the hole and machine gun, and then, like I said, they hit us about 2 o'clock in the morning. And they killed 3 guys, the guys that were down in the hole. And I went running down. And the first grenade went off and hit me between the eyes. I had a helmet on and a .45 in my hand, and I was going around the side of the tree, and the grenade went off, and the tree took most of the shrapnel. But my head was this way, and I got hit right here and here. And with that, I fell down. I thought I got shot. I fell down and I went like this, and I sat down and I dropped the .45, and then I don't know, maybe a minute later, another grenade went off and hit me in the legs and my arms, and then I tried to stand up, and my 2 legs were broken, the tibias, and I fell into the gun hole, and we were trying to get that's what we were trying to do when I was going around the side. Was this one guy was trying to lift one of the other guys out of the hole so we could get in there to get the gun operating and fight off the guys that were coming up. And I fell into the hole, and then machine gun was gone completely because the grenade blew the machine gun off of the parapet. And I felt around for a hand grenade, and I picked up a hand grenade and threw it down the hill. And then I didn't hear any more after that. They must have went back. And then 3 guys got killed, and 3 of us got wounded from it. And then there was a couple of other guys, the Chinese or there were North Koreans. They came up. They always attacked you at night because. Again, we couldn't see them, and they would had a way of sneaking up on you. So you had to be ready for them.
So you were very lucky then.
Very lucky.
Wow.
Ended up with 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and a colostomy. You know what a colostomy is?
No, I don't.
No. I hate to tell you, I got hit in the ass and a colon. And, you know, the big joke of it is when I get together with all of the other Marines that I was with over there, he said, "Hey, Ozzy, show me a scar." And what it is that it hit the intestines. And they didn't find out about that. They got me down to an aid station, and they took care of the legs. And the arm. They put my legs in a splint, and they took a bullet out of my left thigh, and then and that was it. And I keep complaining for 2 days. I said, "Jesus, there's something wrong with my stomach." The doctor said, "You've been through a traumatic time." He says, "Your stomach is all in knots." He said, "Yeah, you know, it'll calm down after a while. We're in shock." Because what they did was, after I got hit, we fought, you know, we got pushed the guys back, and they didn't attack anymore. Because the whole platoon that was there was firing out to them, so and throwing grenades down, and so they found out that we were strength enough that they couldn't get through us. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get through us. So they brought me into a foxhole, and it was raining. And the corpsman, which is in the Marine Corps, you have Navy corpsmen, and not the Marines. They're corpsmen, they're Navy. And they can wear Marine uniforms and so on, but same thing with chaplains. Chaplains, doctors, and so on, they're all part of the Navy. The United States Marines is really an arm of the Navy. And they got me into the bunker, and he gave me a shot of morphine that was absolutely beautiful. You know, man, you go off in the Neverland on it. And I was on morphine for 3 months because of that. One of the things that it gave you a warm feeling all over your body, but I was bleeding so much that myself and a couple of other guys that have it, we lost, like I said, we lost 3 guys that night, and then they took me off the hill. We were the point out on the hill overlooking the valley. And they took me off of the hill, and then they brought a helicopter down. You ever see MASH on television?
Yeah.
You know those helicopters with the sides in it, where the stretchers are in the sides? So they put you in one of those, and off they go. We didn't call them MASH stations. In the Marine Corps, we call them aid stations. You went to battalion aid, regimental aid, divisional aid, meaning aid stations, meaning, you know, hospitals. And they took me down there, and one of the things was that there was so many wounded that they couldn't take care of them all, so they left some of them outside and so on. And then doctors took a look at me and gave me blood transfusions and so on, and I was able to get through it. And then they cleaned me up a little bit, but I had a hole in my intestines, and all of the fecal matter was coming out and poisoning you know. So I could have rolled a 7 in those days. I mean, he took me from there to the regimental aid, and I kept telling the doctor my stomach hurts like a son of a gun. He said, "That's all right." Had a tough time, and I kept eating, and every time I ate, I upchucked. I couldn't eat because fecal matter was getting into your body, and my temperature started going up so much. So they finally got me down to the USS Haven, which is a hospital ship off the coast of Busan. And the doctors took an x-ray there and found out there was several pieces of shrapnel in my intestines. So they operated immediately, and what they do is they cut your whole stomach open really wide, and then they go in and they take all the shrapnel that's in there out. Then they take an intestine and they cut it in half. And you got all these holes down on the bottom. so that you go to the bathroom through this. Your fecal matter comes out of this split intestine into a bag or bandages that they have. And and when I took a look at this, it was, I think, the 15th of June, and I was going to be 21 on the 20th, so I wasn't even 21 yet. And the doctor came in and he explained it to me what it was, and then they started cleaning me off, and I looked this thing, and there was this big thing sewed onto my belly, where for the next 6 months I relieved myself out of that.
Wow. So you said earlier that you told your family that you were staying in Japan. Did they ever find out you were injured?
Oh, yeah.
There?
What they do is when you get to the aid station, they fill it all out, all of the things, and they send a telegram to your house and say that somebody is wounded. So I found out.
I'm sure they were happy about that. So while you were there, how did you stay in touch with your family?
I did.
You did?
I had a chaplain. I couldn't write because my right arm was broken, and this chaplain aboard the USS Haven, he wrote a letter for me, and he explained to my family that I was all right, and I was just going to have to spend the next several months in the hospital. I stayed on board that ship for about a week and 10 days. And there was a guy next to me and his name was Payne, and I'll never forget it, because I had seen him get hit about 3-4 weeks before that. And he had the same problem that I had. He got hit in the intestines. And he never gained consciousness for some reason or other. He had his whole rear end, the mortar shell landed right in the hole with him, and it hit him and blew his whole ass out.
Wow.
And he died there. And I'll never forget it. I'm laying in bed and next to him on a ship, and I found out that he had a colostomy, the same as me. And he died the second day I was there, third day that I was there. And the corpsman came in and they were stuffing him. When you die, they stuff your nostrils, they stuff your ears, they stuff your rear end, they stuff everything that's an office of you, so that whatever is inside you don't come out. So they were stuffing him, and I said to the corpsman, I said, "Do you mind doing that someplace else?" Because all I can think of is maybe in a couple of days they'd be stuffing me too. So it wasn't a nice sight.
So you said you didn't keep in contact with your family when you were in Korea at all?
When I got over to Japan, I went over to a place called Yokosuka Naval Hospital. After spending about 10 days, like I said, aboard the USS Haven, they flew me by helicopter over to Yokosuka. And I was over in Yokosuka, and again, there was so many wounded by that time. It was half of my platoon was over there. So we had just got decimated. We just got the crap beat out of us. There was our lieutenant. They had a battle after that one battle that I had, where they lost probably about 6 or 8 guys, and then there was an awful lot of wounded. And then I was in a wheelchair over there, so they were able to come in and get me, and then take me out in a wheelchair. Not in a wheelchair, like a gurney, because I had to lay flat. Because I had 2 cast on my legs and a cast on my arm, and then this colostomy, and I'd crap all over myself every day, And but went over to Yokosuka and stayed over there for about 2 weeks until you recuperate. And one night, they woke me up about 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. And they said that my mother and father were on the telephone. So I was able to talk to them about that. And that was the only time. And then I started to get better and I was able to write letters. And then from there I went to, from Yokosuka, Japan to Tripoli General Hospital in Honolulu, right by Pearl Harbor. And then from there to Oakland Naval Hospital in California, and then from there to San Antonio, and then to St. Albans Naval Hospital in Long Island, not too far from my house.
Okay. So while you were in Korea, did you feel like you had enough supplies, or were you ever,
Oh yeah,
you were?
we had all the ammunition we could use, we had all the food I could have. There was a few times there when we had problems getting food, you know, if we were surrounded. There was one time, I'll never forget it, it was, we were in the rear guard, the Chinese were re-attacking us again, and we were in this one town, and the town was on fire. I mean, everything was burning in the town. The toughest thing was the fight in the town. I'd rather fight up in the hills, because in the town, you never know what's behind a window, and you don't know if the civilians are there, or, you know, if you fire on somebody. I almost killed a civilian in a barn one day. There was 3 of them, and they just popped up, and I swung around and I took a look at them, and came close to firing at the 3 of them. And you don't want to be in a town, you know. But anyway, we were in this town, and it wasn't until 35, 40 years later that I found out that it was. We were completely surrounded, and we were in this town that was burning, and we were trying to get out of town. And we were the only company. The company was probably about 100 guys at the time. And I'm watching the company commander. At that time, was a guy by the name of, well, I'll think of it after. Forget names as you get older. You learn one name and the other name has to go out the other side, like a computer. Anyway, I see him, it's like a Congo line here. We're going like this, you know, and he's reading the street signs of the town. He's got his map and he's trying to tell, you know, which way it is. And we're completely surrounded in there. And the town is burning down. It's like about 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And finally we ran down these railroad tracks. And we got out of the town. And I found out, I was out in Omaha, Nebraska, in about 1990, and this one Lieutenant Kohler, his name was, Kohler, he said to me, and we were talking about that town, and it was a town called Chungkang. And he said, oh, I remember, he said, I was back at battalion at the time. And he said the Chinese used to listen to our radios. They would key in on our radios. So he said what we did was we told them that, you know, there's a way out of town. And he said the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. And I remember the radio man telling me afterwards, he said, they're talking about Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, you know. And what he was trying to tell them was the railroad tracks. You ever hear of the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe? Well, that was a famous song back in the late 40s and early 50s. Judy Garland used to sing it on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. And it was code for the railroad tracks. And I said to myself, that was pretty sharp for Kohler, this Lieutenant Kohler, to say that, you know. So we went down a railroad track, but when we were crossing over one of the rivers, the guys were falling through the ties on the river, and, you know, breaking legs and so on. And at that time I was a gunner, and I was carrying a gun on my back, and I remember you watch out that you don't fall through the ties, and it's darker than hell, and you're trying to find a railroad track. I mean, a tie to walk across it. So, but we got out of there, and I lost my famous knife that night. I'm running down this creek, And the knife that I had, I guess it came loose, and I heard it clink. And I went back to take a look at it and couldn't find it because it was a nice little knife that I used for many things. But that's why I remember that. But the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe I found out in Omaha, Nebraska, 35, 40 years later.